Welcome to Season 4 of Lucid Cafe. I'm your host, Wendy Halley. Back in the saddle. Now that I'm starting the 4th season of the podcast, I was thinking I might need to let you know what this podcast is about. A lot of podcasters start each episode with a brief overview of their show, kind of like a tagline. For example, a podcaster might say, "Hey, this is the Crazy for Knitting podcast, where we talk about the latest knitting patterns because we really love to knit. A lot." You get the idea. But since I dropped the first episode of Lucid Cafe back in 2018, I've had a tough time trying to summarize what this show's all about, which is probably why I haven't done it. But I was thinking maybe I could say something like, Lucid Cafe, a podcast about shit Wendy finds interesting. Because that's really what it's about. Or how about this one? Lucid Cafe, a podcast that explores healing, consciousness, and the complexities of being human, with a serving of smartass. I think that sums it up. If I'm missing something, send me a note. Before we get to today's guest, I've got a couple of quick announcements to make. The first is that Lucid Cafe can now be found on the YouTube. So if that's your preferred way of consuming podcasts, we've got you covered. So if you just type Lucid Cafe into the YouTube search bar, you'll be directed to the entire library of episodes. And the second thing, which I'm pretty excited about, is that I've expanded my Etsy shop, where I've been selling hand-painted shamanic frame drums for some years, to include a vast array of t-shirts and blank journals and notebooks with super cool designs on them. Well, the whole thing started with my wish to have the definition of heathen written on a t-shirt, because it's actually pretty funny and it sums me up to a T. And then it went from there. So not only is there a heathen t-shirt now available, but I've started creating a line of power animal t-shirts, which I'll keep adding to as time allows. There are also cool like mandala designs for meditators and yogis, and there's some trippy psychedelic inspired designs as well. All in all, great affordable gifts for yourself and for others, and also a great way to support the podcast. Just look for the Lucid Path shop on Etsy, and I'll include links in the show notes for both the Lucid Cafe YouTube channel and the Lucid Path Etsy shop. Okay. Today's guest is someone with many talents who has many fans, myself included, in central Vermont and beyond. Linda River Valente is a seasoned astrologer, tarot visionary, witch, holistic sexuality educator, and burlesque producer and performer. In this episode, I speak with Linda about spellcasting and astrology, and she gives us an astrological overview of what we might expect in the next couple of years. Please enjoy my conversation with Linda River Valente. Linda, I'm really happy that you're here chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Just to let listeners know, this is our 18th attempt to try to start this conversation.
Yeah. Number 7 was really good. You guys missed it.
Yeah. It wasn't for everyone, though. So I would love to learn more about the work that you do. I've experienced as a client, but I mean, I want to get the whole scope of what it is that you do. So how do you describe, like, when you're at a cocktail party, because I know you go to them pretty much every day.
Oh my
every
God.
day you go to cocktail parties.
Yeah.
Well, how do you describe what it is that you do?
I would usually start by saying that I'm an astrologer and a holistic sexuality educator. So that's how I kind of start opening people up to the work that I do. But of course, I also read and teach tarot. I do custom spell work for clients. I teach sex magic. I'm a burlesque producer and performer, and a bunch of other things. But the cocktail party, the drink in my hand, I'll tell you that I'm an astrologer and a sex educator.
Okay. That's a lot of things. So I imagine you have a very large business card.
I don't, but what a good idea, Wendy.
Yeah.
Love that.
You could have like a series of them.
Actually,
them
my
3.
business card says astrologer, tarot visionary, witch, and holistic sexuality educator. And I made that business card probably in 2016. And if I were to update it to today, I would definitely shift it so that the astrology work and the holistic sexuality work, the work with the erotic, is up toward the top. Because those are the things that are really leading what I'm up to.
How did you find your way to doing all of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. I've been a student of astrology and tarot and magic since I was a teenager. So about 30 years now. Of course, the easy answer would be look at my chart and you know exactly why I do what I do. But for everybody else, I'll just tell you that astrology and magic pulled at me really early on. I remember I went to this kind of like, this is fresh, but who cares, this, rednecky kind of rural high school in New Hampshire. And in 9th grade, somehow, when I walked into the school library, there was a book called Love Magic. And it had all of the hammy, appalling late 80s, early 90s pictures that one would need in such a book like that. But I remember walking in and checking that book out and taking it home and starting to work spells out of it straight away. And even sourcing all my ingredients from the unlikely places and just the whole thing. And so that, I would put that as a touch point for the first conscious spell working that I did. Of course, you work spells all the time. Since you get here, it's like when you come through the gates, right? You're here and you're working your spells. But that would be my first kind of formative moment that I would think of. And so now I do spell work for clients all the time. And I think sometimes I think about that moment of creating and constructing, getting all the correspondences and all of the feeling, and how funny it is that there's so much, I bring so much more to it now.
Yeah, I imagine you do. Well, how would you describe spell work? Like you alluded to, we're doing it all the time.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So from an astrological frame up, from a kind of celestial clock frame up, there are right moments to do certain things. And being in alignment with the time and capturing the potency of a time is really important. So when I think of spell work now, and the way that I do it for clients, there's a lot of fucking bells and whistles. Like, I've got to hit the moon in the right place. I've got to hit the planetary hour. It's like there's such an incredible catalog to draw from to know that I am launching this intentional work for them at the right time. But if I think of spell work in general, in a way where you're not a sorceress for hire, so to speak, there's a way of collaborating with life and with the living and with the imaginal and the intangible, that it's sort of like when you pull up to the station and open your eyes wide and say, yes, there's a thing that I feel, or a thing that I want, or a thing that a being with whom I want to participate. Then you can arrive and you can build like an intentionality around that, and then kind of launch into the ceremony of the moment. But we're spellcasting all the time with our words and our beliefs and the way that we move through the world. We're certainly doing that on a smaller scale, though not less important by a long shot, just a less grand, formalized scale.
All right, so for someone who's listening and has never dabbled in this world, and you're saying to them, well, you're casting spells all the time. Can you give examples of what that
Yeah.
might look like?
So just in someone's, I'll see if I can fuse it with people's relationship to the erotic. So if you have a certain sensibility around sex and you have a little bit of sort of house cleaning or work to do around pieces of your shadow or around pieces of trauma, individual or generational trauma, when you come to sex as like a sacred kind of platform, if you come with all of that kind of uninterrogated, you're doing spell work around the erotic that keeps you bound up or doesn't allow you to get the whole range of feeling or sensation. Or it's like we work spells based on our inner narratives and our stories, and we want to know that they're running, know that they're rolling, because we don't want to cast a crummy spell for shitty sex or for an abusive relationship or for any of these things that profoundly diminish us in our experience, our human experience. So part of spellcasting is really to make the unconscious conscious. And when you do that, you're aiming your power in a way that's generative. And there's so much that people do on automatic or habitually or sort of half asleep. I think that's where the spell casting to the other side of the scale happens, where it's like, shit, what's this about my world? Or why do I keep banging up against this thing? And it's like, well, if we brought some of these things to light, the spell casting shifts. It looks different.
So you're saying we are casting spells that don't always serve us because of
Yes.
these unconscious, unhealthy narratives that are playing out in our unconscious.
Yeah.
So are you saying that spell work is really coming from, well, what would you say? Where is it coming from within us?
Well, I was thinking about this. There's a term, practical magic, which is pretty familiar, and folks use it. And I am a big, maybe it's my Taurus rising, but I am a major devotee of practical magic. You do shit, you get shit done. This is real business. This is the business of life. But I was thinking about how sometimes practical magic, for some people, it should just be called practically magic, because the thing that they're missing is putting the plug in the wall where source is and where the magic of the non-human world is. So we can certainly, as humans in our human experience, think about, and humans, since the beginning of the human timeline, humans consciously cast and work with magic. There's a deep, abiding tradition through the entire human timeline within every culture. But the way that we take what is inside us and our desires or our wishes or our duty to spirit or devotion to ancestors or relationship with the wild world, whatever that is, we take the thing that's in us and we're performing these rituals and we're doing these ceremonies. But if we're not plugged in at the wall, sort of, to source itself, then it's just empty gestures. Sometimes they fucking work, the empty gestures. You'd be surprised every now and then. You can nail it with something lucky. Fun. You got lucky. You got a lucky hit, a lucky strike.
So then how does magical thinking come into play? Because to me it's that very childlike, but not necessarily realistic way of how the world works.
Yeah. I think that part of when I sit with magical thinking, something that really occurs to me, having been someone who's done magic for like fucking, is this real 3 decades? That sounds obscene, but apparently that's true. I'm 44, so that's true. Facts. Sitting with magical thinking now is a very different enterprise than it was maybe 10 years ago, because there's a real acknowledgement, growing acknowledgement and understanding that is essential to really doing magical work, which is a consciousness of the profound injustices, culturally, racially. You know, we're looking at all of the pain that capitalism has wrought and all the ways that it takes us away from our magic and away from each other. So magical thinking, sometimes when I hear that phrase, I think of like spiritual bypassing a little bit, which is like, ooh, I'll just do this and throw some glitter at it and I'll just manifest it.
Exactly.
Well,
I was just thinking about that book, The Secret. You remember when that
oh
was
my God,
huge?
that crap. Yes, totally,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. So I think today there's a level of consciousness even within that magical thinking. For me, the way I think of magical thinking today, again, is that it is not about my individuated, fantastical or whimsical conversation with the universe. That's a very important conversation. But it's also like, for me, I need to pop myself into the right place, which is that I am a very big, powerful player in my world, and I need to know that and live like that is true. And then for me, I also like to know that I am but a small friend on this ride with the number of intelligences and souls and beings, and it helps me to be with magical thinking in a way that feels like artistry. It's like the magical thinking isn't, how do I employ XYZ to get this shit and make it transactional? It's like, what water do I want to swim in? Or how can I apply a different intelligence? Maybe non-linear, non-verbal intelligence when I'm thinking.
To make sure I understand, are you commenting on how the Western culture, at least in the United States, I can speak to that culture since I'm living in it,
Yeah.
has this kind of, it's all about the individual, like what you were
Yes.
talking about, capitalism. It's like, I got to be successful,
Yes.
and I got to step on whoever I need to step on in order to get to where I need to be, so that I have all the riches and all the good things that I think are good anyway. And then in doing that, totally overlook the bigger picture, and that you're part of this.
It's relational. What Western, and particularly American culture, has really robbed people of is being in true relationship and true interdependence. I mean, you're supposed to have your shit together on a grand scale, and it really diminishes your power. If you want to be working magic and participating in the relationality, if the spell, if you will, becomes as narrow or small as, I want to get this, and I don't care who I have to step on to get it, or I don't want to consider the backstory of the other players in this, or I guess that's kind of something that's hard about being an astrologer for such a long time, is I have such a fucking ton of empathy for the way people get themselves into shit situations, you know, and like, but on a grand scale, it's that diminishment of interrelation that it takes the plug out of the wall. And then what are you going to put the power plug into? Like, sure, you can put it into yourself, but if you don't see yourself as coexisting within this much longer stretch of timelines, and it's isolated. That's what capitalism does. It fucking pounds the actual literal magic out of a human, because it makes you open your eyes, jump into this game, and have to work to survive. You do not deserve anything you haven't worked like a maniac for. I love my parents, and that is what they taught me, because that was their belief.
I don't think you're alone in that. I
Yeah.
think most of our parents.
Absolutely.
The American
they
dream,
were
right?
they were never offered any deeper wisdom than that. And so that is what they delivered. And I think about the way that my magic has profoundly changed from the teens and the 20s, and even when I was in my early 30s to some extent, because I just wasn't nesting the power of what I was doing into the wilder or wider possible narrative. There was a way in which my magic was colonized. I have no doubt about that. No doubt about that. And probably the happenings, and of course, thank you people, the astrology, this is for real, of the last 10 years, has helped us to look at where we have been subsumed by this narrative of the hustle, do it the best, have it all together, don't show any rough edges. Everything is urgent, everything, more and more and more. And I know that it's a work of a lifetime, that you do it every day, is to continue to deconstruct that.
So then would it make it harder to do magic effectively if you're going against the grain, the cultural grain?
Not if you're going back to actual source. Because
what do you describe as source?
This capitalism idea, this is new shit on the human timeline. Like, this is a little fuck up. This is a little blip. But if you're going back to that deep relationality.
Okay, so indigenous mind.
Yes.
Okay.
If you're going back to indigenous mind, you really do have I guess part of where I think about plugging in at source really is that what we would consider indigenous mind. There's also just a way of getting out of your own way that lets you experience spell casting in a different way. You've gotten out of the confinement that we all have, if you've grown up in the States over the last, 50 years or so. So powerful.
I was just thinking that for those of us who are on kind of the spiritual path and trying to get back to this more relational way of being with the world, especially the natural world, and everything and everyone around us, to be more in relationship with everything, that there's this learning curve because you're starting from square one in a way. Like you said, our parents teach us what they learned, which is the hustle. For most people, it's working your ass off and trying to achieve the American dream in this culture. So it would make sense that we would start at this very childlike level where we would have, getting back to that concept of magical thinking, like, I'm a superhero. I can make this real. If I just think it, I can make a Mercedes-Benz appear in my driveway.
And hey, there are people that they make that work. There are people that work magic in that way, and I am just not one of them.
Well, but
clearly no Mercedes here.
But to get to the point of realizing that it is about the relationships, it's not about you.
Yeah.
Specifically.
I mean, if you want a magical practice, the first thing that you're doing is slowing down and paying attention to all the non-human people that are in your world. So the non-human people being the river that flows under my apartment, the moon when she's passing overhead, all the green and stone people. That's the first way. That's the first way in. And then when I'm working with clients, if I'm teaching magic to them, what I will always remind them of is, you do not go in asking someone for something if you haven't built a relationship with them. Like, who the fuck are you to go
That's a
to
great
go
point.
ask whoever to
Yeah.
deliver whatever to your little mitts? You know, the way you start is you make offerings, you make acknowledgments. One of the most powerful things about prayer is not when we are praying for something, but when we are first praying to and on behalf of and with that deity or being with whom we want to appeal, right? We just don't go rolling up and asking for favors. It's sort of like if you're going to your Nana's house, you wash up and like wear whatever decent clothes and hi Nana, I brought you delicious food, right? That's what you do to your altar. You fucking tidy that shit. You are in communion with what's on it, and you bring offerings and you bring your prayers and you bring humility, or fuck it. You bring humility. And there are plenty of spectacular magicians who will disagree with that. The power of their will suffices. They don't need to be in relation to anything, and that works for them. And
That sounds like capitalist magic, right?
it sure does to me. Yeah. But that is a working that's a plug you could plug into. It
Okay,
isn't-
so your ethics can inform your magical practice.
Yeah.
There's not like one
Oh.
size fits all.
Yeah, there's your ethics absolutely inform your magical practice. But the practice of giving offerings, of being in communion before making the ask. It's just good manners,
Mhm.
and also spirits like when you have good manners. Like they do. And you bring them stuff.
But also how it translates to the person with the ask is that it sort of slows down the process.
It totally slows it
and
down.
it makes you
And there's a
reflect.
self-reflective,
Yeah.
yes, there's a self-reflective element, which again, that is not one of the strong suits of Western culture and capitalism, the slowing down and the genuine self-reflection. There's plenty of the like, I'm going to reflect on how rad I am on an Instagram thing or whatever happens. Like, all right, that's okay. That's okay to do if that is good for you. But that genuine kind of dissolve. There's a dissolve that happens when you're in communion. In my way of thinking, it's honorable. Like, that's how you treat each other. That's how we should be treating the human people, the non-human people, and that's what we want to do with spirit. Is just, I wouldn't feel good about my magic if I felt that I was here to make this grand human imprint and to make things happen to my design, and without letting life work on me too. Because I think that's how I was certainly raised to believe that you go out and you work very hard and you're honest and you do a thing and you're just in a perpetual striving to be allowed to live.
I'm familiar with that. Yes.
Yeah. And so when that is not a friend of magic, that way of moving, that does not prepare the right conditions, let's say, to be able to feel and be part of some of these bigger things.
Okay. So how does astrology play into all of this for you? How does astrology even work?
Yeah. Which is it's probably like that's the tip-top question, right? Is like, how does this work? Which makes sense, because look at us, where we're from. This is like, we want to know how things work. We want to inquire into it.
What's your take on it?
Yeah. There's a great quote from astrologer Robert Hand that the question is, what is truer, French or German? What language is truer? So I love that, because what he's continuing on to say is that astrology is a symbolic language. I'm not hawking astrology as a religion or that everybody's got it, whatever. I just know that down to the marrow of my bones, when I pay attention to that clock and when I get into those nested timelines and I understand the way that the movement of eras are shaped by the movement of planets and natural cycles, I know that that is my natural clock, and it literally tells me what time it is. I know that when it is such and such a time, when we are in an era such as we are now of Saturn and Aquarius, I know there's an energetic marker. There's a way that time rolls. You go back every time in the human timeline during a Saturn and Aquarius era, you're going to get something's going to be a live wire that's going to run right through those times and marry them to each other. So when I think about astrology, I conceive of it as this grand clock. It's a symbolic language of time, and it is a sense of time that is not, again, not the linear Western capitalist, and then there's time scarcity, and there's never enough time, and it's like, okay, don't look at the clock on your phone for a minute, and let's talk about what time it is.
Okay.
In the grander way. That's how for 13 years of my life, I was a public librarian, and there's a way that my time as a librarian has really informed the way that I do my work and my practice. But there's something about when you're a librarian, you're kind of a keeper of this repository of wisdom. And when you're an astrologer, you're a keeper of a repository of wisdom that is the wisdom of time and of all the fucking things. Like, you take time for granted. You don't know that you're certainly not taught as a kid within this culture, within Western culture, that there's another way to conceive of time, but there is. And so I find that every day of my life, for myself personally and in practice with people, it is a way of seeking patterns in time, knowing what this moment is good for, knowing what this brings up in us that is kind of ratty and not for the best, and how do we sit with it, and helps imbue you, I think, with a different sense of understanding of patience. So that's kind of the whole big way that I conceive of what astrology is and what it can do, and so much more. But
Well, that sounds so very different than reading your horoscope.
yes, so very different. And please, people, read decent horoscopes. No.
So yeah, what is your take on the kind of more pop
Yeah.
view of astrology?
It's been super interesting, again, in like the last 10 years or so, to watch these arcs of people coming into relationship with this material. And when it comes to the idea of sun sign horoscopes, I am delighted to say that people really do, I think largely people that are willing and interested in this understand that it's so much more than that. So sun sign horoscopes to me they have a little bit of that like patriarchal, capitalist, we're just going to give value to the thing that is most visible, because in our chart, our sun is this kind of beaming ray. It's our external personality. So it's easy to see someone's sun sign be alive in them as they move through the world. And important, certainly important. I mean, very fucking important, and nowhere near the entire piece of the story. I think it kind of connects more with that interrelation. And I know when I'm doing charts for people, my main goal is to help them befriend themselves in a profound way. I want them to see all of the little bits and pieces that are part of their imprint, as diverse as they may be, as shitty as they may seem at first pass, or I want them to be able to see that and hold the richness of all of that, make it a kaleidoscope, not just my sun sign is this, therefore I fill in the blanks, kind of Mad Libsy style of proceeding.
Right. And I would say that my experience working with you over the last however many years, that has been the case. Is as you go through my chart, each time we sit down together, there's this wealth of information that in a lot of ways is validating even the challenging stuff.
Yes.
Like, oh, there's this thread of maybe behavior that I have that you're pointing out because of an asteroid.
Yeah.
Or
yeah. Oh, I fucking love asteroids. Are my favorite lately. Yeah.
So
but yes, there's like an energetic imprint. There's like If you imagine in your chart that a certain placement of a planet or an asteroid, based on the sign that it's in, based on the house that it's in, based on the conversation it has with other planets, which we call aspects, if you were to like take that in your hands and kind of roll it, like ball it up, like do a little pat it into a little cake, then I want people to be able to look at all of those kind of jewels all together and be able to find some of that through story that we do carry. Our charts are dynamic. I mean, we are growing and changing every day, and it is the case that kind of the stamp which we receive upon arrival, it's profoundly important. And I think that people naming the way that that validation or that affirmation makes them feel and helps them move through the world as themselves. That's what feels really important, because this is not cookie cutter process. This is like fingerprint unique. Like we need to give ourselves permission to be all of these things. That's another anti-magic principle, would be that we need to bash out parts of them or fix parts of them or standardize parts of them. It's like, that's not what we're up to. We want to see more and more, like the weirder the better. Like follow that trail.
So you are like this librarian, not just of books,
Yes.
but that's what it's like when I sit down with you. It's like I'm going to the library of Wendy.
Yeah. Yep. And I want to be able to say to people, like, here's this shelf, and that might be a little more than you need now, or like, this is from the reference collection, so you can't slide it out and check it out. You just, it's like, or all these different types of media or ways in which. But yeah, it's like there's this amazing vault of all of these, your memories and your traumas and your exhilarations and rites of passage and all these things that have happened to you, and we can kind of slide them around on the shelf. And by sliding them around on the shelf, it could be like, see, now if you read this book and this book inspired you, what do you want to read next? Or if you liked this, you're going to like that. Or just ways that we can keep pulling you toward expansion, not for the sake of some grand individual moment of enlightenment, which is like not my gig, but just a continued awakening. That's what feels important.
So I'm thinking about, again, the kind of popular notion of astrology.
Yep.
And how it's either put into the realm of magical thinking.
Yes.
Like
Yep.
if I
that
read my
it's a
horoscope,
pseudoscience.
yeah, and then for the rationally minded, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
So
Yes.
how do you address that? Because
Yeah. Well, for the rationally minded, I would like to say to them, friends, you believe you are the rationally minded, but let's go back to a time in which the greatest thinkers, the people of imagination and power, the scientists with a capital S, and science with a capital S is so important. These were people for whom there was not a divide between logos and eros in terms of, this is the rational, logical way. My body is a meat sack that just does certain things and organs do certain things, and I don't have consciousness, or consciousness is a trick or a game, or so that's all ridiculous. That's fluff. I would say, oh, friends, if you do want to consider yourself as a rational person, or as a person of science or knowledge or wisdom keeper, let's roll back a little bit to a pre-Descartian, I think, therefore I am, right? Where your brain is just like a machine in your head. Let's go back to those times and like inquire more about what is irrational to you about this, or why couldn't that be possible? Or, like, let's have a conversation about it. And I think it's hard. I've observed that it's particularly hard for people in this moment to hold coexisting truths. that there's such a push for polarity, that
Right.
something is either this way or that way. It's the good old two-party system, or this one is right, or this one is wrong, or this one is this, or anti this. It's like the nuance of conversation. It is painfully lacking at this point. So if we were to look at the magical thinking versus the folks that hold that imaginal space versus the logic and the rationale, I would say to both of them, I invite you to come play in the middle. It's a lot fucking more fun. And you want to be able to do good magic? You need to edge walk. You need to play in the middle. Let's not sanitize the life out of this moment.
Yeah, I was just thinking that on the rational side, that I suspect that they would probably lean on superstition, that it's just
Right.
it was a way that ancient people, they would look at the sky and that's how they would explain away the difficult things in life.
And if you believe, as modern Western folks have been brought to, if you believe that you just look at the sky but are not in like a revelatory relationship with it, sure, that makes sense. It's kind of like when you think of the way that in modern times people have such a grand narrative about how primitive peoples are less intelligent and less dialed in, and all of these things.
Mm-hmm. That's why I like calling myself a heathen.
Yeah, like prepare to be
Uncivilized.
humbled, my friends. Prepare to be radically further humbled, especially when we get to 2023. I'm ready for you to be humbled.
All right, so we'll come back to that in a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah, so it's just, there's a way that we in our modernity are so conceited and want to look back over time and frame the world according to modern worldview. This is like, you cannot go back in time and just project all of your, well, we think they did this because this, and we think they did that. It's like, when I think about this kind of rational versus superstition kind of thing, it makes me think so much of Göbekli Tepe, which is this incredible site, sacred site in Turkey, far older than Stonehenge. And what I love about Göbekli Tepe that fucking fascinates me is it wasn't like, hey, everybody, let's settle down and build a farm, and then we'll have businesses, and then we'll build churches, and then we'll be civilized. And it's like, this sacred site was built as a vector for magic and sacred ceremony and ecstatic ceremony. And there's a way in which it breaks the understanding that we have about civilization. People don't get civilized and relax and do this and that and be the coolest one on the block and have the most followers and then find magic. You go where there's nothing. There's absolutely fucking nothing. You dance and you pray and you be in relationship, and then life upwells from there. So Göbekli Tepe is a really rad example of all the weirdnesses and the synchronicities of the site, and the things that we're understanding is like, we can't just backcast modern humanity upon everything that came before us, because this is not the frame in which people are thinking and living. And if it suits somebody to call that superstition and not sit with the incredible cosmology and the arts and the sciences and the way of living that these people practice in every moment without naming it any goddamn thing, they just know how to live on this world and with this world. If it suits someone to call it superstition, I really invite them to do a little tiny bit of a mind melt, like just a little bit. You don't have to turn the microwave all the way on, right? But just take a moment and entertain the possibilities that there's more happening behind the curtain or under the surface. Just let yourself sit with it. And if we could be doing that for each other as a human family right now, on a one-on-one basis, instead of this profound polarity around cultural issues, we'd be a lot better off, I think.
And I was just thinking, as you were talking, that the way my perspective on the nature of reality has shifted since I started having my shamanic experiences back in the day,
Yeah.
and that more relational way of viewing everything and the rich symbolic
Yes.
underpinnings
Yes.
of everything,
Yeah.
and that this idea that this is the dream, this physical
Yes.
reality is the dream, which Native people have been saying
Yes.
for a long,
Yeah.
long, long time. I mean, it ends up that my goal has been, and it kind of happened organically, but when I think back on some of the earlier wisdom teachings I received in my shamanic training through the Hawaiian Polynesian tradition, this idea that we have these three aspects of self, the three souls, however you
Yes.
want to put it, and that the goal, what I was taught, the language that was used is the ideal man or human.
Mm-hmm.
The ideal human has a relationship between all three parts of self.
Yeah.
And so we have the spiritual self, the higher self, we have the mental self, the thinking, rational self, and we have the emotional, intuitive, psychic self.
Yeah.
And that if they are all in relationship with one another, then it's like you got the little key and you open up the door and stuff starts making sense in a much richer way.
Yeah.
And then the side effect of that, which is the point of my saying all this, is that I found that there's, and this has been a struggle, this hasn't been easy. I'm moving more into balance between this rational, skeptical side of myself and the more open, magical part of myself.
Yeah.
And as I'm settling into that more, it's like everything is making more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's just a way of like, again, there's a profound diminishment. People want to talk about their individual power and their how they can do this and they can do this, and power and agency is essentially important. But if we're spending down our power units on trying to manage and connect with only one of those parts of ourself, again, it's like there's such a rich story that's available.
Well, you'd be going in a circle, I think, right?
Yeah.
If you're just going right,
Yes.
then you're just going to keep going in a circle and end up in the same place again.
And the idea itself that we would have to fractionalize or break out all these different ways of being and parts of us, if we can, each time we catch ourselves in that noticing, if we just do the best we can, again, to just mush them together and understand all of these parts belong to me. I'm not driving any of them out. I'm not demonizing any of these parts. I'm going to acknowledge what's been taught to me, what isn't really in thrumming through me from source. I'm going to acknowledge what should I pick up from culture. What have my life experiences been? I'm going to be real with that. I'm going to be right up front with that. And I'm going to hold enough compassion that I don't splinter. It's the relationality that you're talking about, even inside ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's vital.
Enormous.
Through your astrological lens, how would you describe this particular time that we're going through in human history?
Yeah. At the beginning of 2020, no, at the end of 2019, I remember doing a class for my students to try and help them to understand what 2020 would look like according to these symbolic cycles that were up for living. And what I would say is, so let's see, so this show will come out in the autumn, right? Well, that's fine, because what I have to say is going to stick around.
For the record, we're recording in July of 2021.
Which has its own type of squeeze for sure. So the astrological happenings of 2020 opened up to be seen by a much larger range of people than had seen it previously. The way in which empire, I would say the way in which empire absolutely demolishes magic. But another way to think of it is pieces about injustice and inequity and the way that we're moving through this world as a human family really came up to the fore in 2020 as a result of some culminating astrology that was January the 19th of that year. We're now in this time arc for 21, 22, and a little bit of 23, where the planet Saturn is inside the sign of Aquarius. And when a planet arrives in a sign, based on the personality of that planet, they have a certain level of comfort or mobility or what they think about being in that neighborhood. So we have a time in which Saturn, which is profoundly about rules and regulation and discipline and that which endures and certainly has its connection to capitalism and Western culture, where that planet is in the sign of Aquarius, which is a sign of innovation, profound innovation, and redesign. And there's a utopian quality about Aquarius. It's a status quo disrupt, for sure. There's a way that the years of 21 and 22 in particular should be considered as one year, so to speak, because the story that's happening between Saturn and Aquarius and its relationship to Uranus and Taurus is powerful. So when we think about these nested timelines, the last time that we had Uranus and Taurus era was the 30s leading up to World War II. And in American culture, in 2020, I think we could have easily named that we were somehow time warping to the 1930s in many ways. So the conversation between these two planetary placements is the friction between structure and freedom. It's a profoundly uncomfortable moment in which you've had your mind blown to some extent, and you're trying to figure out exactly how you lodge it into new systems. This particular era is so powerfully about the transformation of agriculture, of healthcare, of systems of currency. I remember in 2018 naming for some of my students what the Uranus and Taurus era was like. And here we are in 2021, and outside of all of the cryptocurrency and the Bitcoin and all of this, we're looking at, holy fuck, the American people and the world at large have been transformed, but the American people have experienced a time, very Uranus and Taurus, where we are talking about food security and currency. We're talking about reparations. We're talking about the land back movement. We're talking about who can actually own land. What does it actually mean when you think you own land? We're talking about a time of incredible widespread financial instability and the way that technology is now hooked deeply into this story. This is the billionaires on the moon volume, right? If we slide some books off the shelf right now, we have the shit show of the billionaires going to the moon. Okay, boys, I hope that's super fun for you. But meanwhile, on Earth, right, here's what's going on. So this moment in an astrological frame, particularly 21 and 22, because I think it's important to give people little bites right now, or we won't feel like chewing. That's the truth. Is that some of what's available to us in this time is the kind of deep localization, mutual aid, relationality, really understanding that there is whatever kind of assumptions you were previously operating under from a cultural perspective. Those all need to be interrogated, and you need to think a little bit about what kind of world do I want to live in, and who do I want to be in this world. And do not look or give reference to any of those old expectations. It's a beginner's mind exercise. Who has not been invited to the table? Who has been invited to the table and then fucking maced and handcuffed and thrown? And this is not just culturally, but this is inside every one of us. So what pieces of you do you need to really look at this tension between freedom and liberation? That's where a big part of the erotic in my work also comes in with people, is like the erotic isn't just about sex. It includes sex and sensuality, but it's a bigger type of magic. It's a bigger type of like liberation. So when I think about this timeline and some of the real pains and wounds that the human family is having at this time, I know that leaning into the erotic, leaning into magic, leaning into community, I know that those are the ways to move through this in the best possible way, because it will economically, as an American people, certainly it's a global gesture, but we're going to experience supply chain disruptions and inflation, and there are some tricky times ahead for the American people, and this is the perfect opportunity to say, oh, what do you mean pre-World War II astrology? What does that mean? Well, what might I gold mine out of that time to understand the moment we're in? But I think to give like the takeaway would be, please people, let yourself have deeper and more nuanced conversations both with yourself and other people. Understand a multiplicity of truths can be right at the same time. And if you want this place to be better and feel better, then let's do better and let's do it together.
All right. So I'm trying to imagine how that might play out, because it seems like we're so far away from that idea of empathy, really.
Yeah, there is a dramatic lack in the empathy zone at the moment. I think people are coming. I believe that the last year and a half, people are largely coming from the right place. They want to keep people safe. They want to do the right thing. They want to live with love. I really believe that they do. But that is also baked into this enormous machine of the idea that there is always perpetual growth and progress, that there is no down moment. Everyone's like in such a tizzy to get the economy has to do this and that. And again, this is what we've been brought up inside. There's a way that the black and whiteness, or the polarity, the this and thatness of this moment, it's also very fucking scary to live in the middle. It is profoundly destabilizing. It's the chaos, and that is where magical shit happens.
But even in the poles, there's the illusion of safety.
Absolutely. There's the illusion.
I was just thinking, too, that one of the good things that came out of the pandemic experience was there was an opportunity for reflection, I think, and a lot of people took themselves up on it because of the kind of forced isolation.
Yeah.
It was really challenging and difficult for, I think, a lot of us.
Yep.
And boy, my wish is that just looking inward not be a painful experience, because I do think a lot of us, in the spirit of progress and moving forward and stuff, that can be a total distraction as well.
Yeah.
And keep us from doing that deep look inside, even at like a minor look inside, or a skim along the surface of your inside.
Yeah.
Because it's like when you get to know something, it ceases to be frightening.
Yeah.
Really.
Yes.
It's like you look under the bed and, there's not a monster there.
Yeah.
Every time you refuse to look under the bed, that monster gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And then you can't get enough lights on to keep you from getting eaten.
Yep. Yeah. I'm really it's for sure that the cultural shifts that have happened over the last year and a half have given people opportunity for self-reflection that they maybe never had at the depth or constancy that they had never had before. And I guess I also feel hopeful. I'm hoping that as things quote unquote get back to normal, that it isn't just a blip
I've wondered about that, if it will be.
because there's more to come. So I'm just like, people, please don't go back to sleep now. Like, really.
Well, I mean, sometimes we need to get
I mean, you can tap out and take a break for real, and we need to support each other to, to do that. But
tap out.
But there's more unfolding and
More cage rattling coming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I mean, I can feel it. I've been feeling this tension building for a couple of decades now, and it just
Yes.
keeps getting more and more intense.
Yep, and it is the 2030s in which there's a landing of like, oh, all right, now we get. So the entire decade of the 2020s has these kind of astrological signatures happening that are carrying us through to a culture, I think, that looks fundamentally different by the 2030s, and in ways that people can't yet conceive of. Yeah.
Makes me curious.
I know.
It could either be Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, so
Or
let's fucking get in there and yeah. Yes.
No, fuck that. Yeah. Well, Linda, I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you.
And we
Yes.
didn't even get a chance to talk about your holistic sexual education work.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe at some point you can come back on and
Yeah, I
we
would
can
love
dive
that.
into that.
Yeah, it's work that I am doing more and more, and it's been fun to be able to work not just with individuals but with couples over time. Yeah, so I'd love to.
Cool. Yeah, and then we can also add in a little conversation about burlesque shows.
Yeah. I can always talk about burlesque shows.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
If you'd like to get some insight into your life, you can reach Linda through her website, lindarivervalente.net. And stay tuned for Linda Part 2 later this season, where we'll explore her work as a burlesque performer and holistic sexuality educator. Alrighty, that does it for this episode. It's good to be behind the mic again. Got another good lineup of thought-provoking conversations coming your way this season. Thank you so much for listening and for supporting the podcast in whatever way you can, by giving it a positive review, letting others know about the show, making a donation, or by checking out the new offerings at the Lucid Path Etsy shop. Until next time.